Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're just going to give it a moment to let everybody queue into the webinar. If you're just joining us, we're just giving it a minute for everybody to join into the webinar. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Munier. I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items that Kathleen on the team will also post in the chat. Just to let you know, all participants are muted. The conversation is being recorded, and we will have that available on the Engage to Excel website and via email. We also encourage questions, so you can enter those in the Q&A on the lower bottom of the screen. And if we don't get to all the questions, we will send you a response directly to your email if you don't post anonymously. So Charles, Darren, it looks like we've got a great group joining us today. And as I introduce the both of you, I'm actually going to launch a quick poll for everybody to get ready for this conversation. So on the screen, you should see the question, how would you describe your organization's current approach to AI governance in in HR and talent acquisition? And your options are, we have a formal governance framework, we have some policies, but no formal framework. We are exploring governance options, and we have no governance in place yet. So if you want to just go ahead and choose your response. Again, my name is Melissa Munier. I lead the marketing team here at Engage to Excel. I will be your moderator along with Kathleen, who's in the background. Joining us today are Dr. Charles Sherbaum and Darren Finley. Excuse me, Charles is our Chief Analytics Officer, and he's a nationally recognized expert in analytics, talent management, assessment, legally compliant hiring practices. In addition, he's also a professor of psychology at Baruch College in New York City. And Darren leads our recruitment solutions division and business strategy. And we also like to refer to him, he's gotten this nickname, our resident labor market expert, whether he likes it or not. Charles and Darren, thank you both for joining us today to talk about more about AI governance.
Thank you.
Good. All right. So it looks like we've got some responses here. So I'm going to end the poll and put those results on the screen for you. And I'll hand it off to you to start the conversation.
Sounds good. Thanks, Melissa. And Charles, thanks for joining today. And everyone that's joined. This is an interesting conversation we're going to have. It's a 30-minute conversation today. So we'll probably run through this pretty quickly for you. But as you can see from the poll, there's a wide variety of perspectives here when you think about what governance looks like and what risk looks like within organizations. And so we're going to talk about all of these things, really five things we're going to try to focus on today. And the first is going to be the kind of current landscape of AI governance in AI and around HR organizations. And then we're going to talk about some legal and regulatory considerations to think about. We'll also spend a little bit of time talking about the tension between organizational control, candidate empower, and/or employee empowerment, really at this point, what we really want to talk about. Then we'll talk about how to design governance frameworks that align with your AI maturity level. And then last but not least, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about some practical examples of policies and some transparency practices and some risk mitigation strategies that you can use really overall to kind of help you get started in this. And I say get started because I think when you look at the current state of AI adoption organizations, everybody is getting started. And so when you look at the majority of organizations that we work with out there, everybody is in really early stages of AI adoption, AI implementation, and really very few have yet to scale it across their organization effectively. There's a few that are getting there, but about 2/3 of organizations are still in this experimental phase and doing piloting phases of AI. There's a study I saw this week that 80% of the respondents reported using AI in at least one business function. And that's up from 78% really late last year. But only about one third of organizations have begun scaling that across their enterprise. And so we do see that there's this kind of delay and or lack of scale kind of across the board. Now, when you think about HR and AI adoption, I really feel like that HR was taking the lead, especially recruiting. That's my perspective, I guess, but we're really taking a lead in a lot of use cases around AI adoption. I think that since that occurred the last half of last year, or some of last year, and then the early part of this year, we have seen it begin to scale into other parts of the organization. So from manufacturing, finance, marketing, all divisions in an organization are now starting to think about how are we going to be using AI and what kind of guardrails do we need to put in place to think through that. And so that's really kind of where we're going to focus a lot of our time today. Just that, where the guardrails that you need, how does it impact the organization? How does it impact the adoption and utilization of AI in the organization, itself? So I think that organizations are really becoming, more proactive today when it comes to addressing AI related risk as those challenges kind of arise. And when you think about what those risks are, and what are some of the negative use cases, and Dr. Charles, you can probably comment on some of this, and we think about regulatory considerations and just market concerns that are out there. But a lot of respondents to these surveys that I'm reading say, hey, yeah, we've got at least one negative experience that happened, and that's where our governance is occurring, right? So you may not have had a problem, over here in one area of the company, but wherever they had the problem, there's an immediate response around some kind of governance around a negative consequence that occurred overall. And interestingly, when you start looking at these things, that um, AI being inaccurate was probably the most commonly reported risk that they felt. I was talking to Phil Stewart, this morning about some things that we have done in AI in the organization and how much it's matured over the last year and a half, where you put in a query into ChatGTP last year, and you're getting sometimes 1 and 2 year old data because it was the public facing version. We weren't using Copilot. The data was old, and so you had to be really thoughtful about how you use some of that data just in queries and prompts that you were using. And I think it's interesting too that people are getting a lot better at writing their prompts through trial and error around AI. But Dr. Charles, when you think about the legal and regulatory considerations, what are you seeing and what can you kind of talk to on that?
I think your framing around risk is really the central theme and accuracy of the models. This morning, I read a quote from Google talking about their new upgrades that gets their models to 78% accurate, which is a little scary when we think, particularly in talent acquisition, we really aim for very, very high levels of accuracy. The broader regulatory environment, in some ways, there's a lot of certainty, and in other ways, there's a lot of uncertainty. That certainly AI is a new technology that impacts how we do things, but many of the existing rules of the road aren't changed. When we think about what are considered legally compliant, fair employment practices, those haven't changed. What has changed is the regulations around this specific technology. And in Europe, we have the EU AI Act, which really thinks about AI from the risk perspective, as you were describing, and puts any sort of talent acquisition usage or human resource usage into the higher risk categories, which means much more oversight, much more guardrails are needed. In the US at the federal level, there's unlikely to be any sort of regulation of AI as it relates to talent acquisition and HR, I think, in the near term. Certainly, there's a lot of activity at the state and local levels. We've seen pretty big upgrades in California, Colorado. There's some existing laws in Illinois, the New York City AI bias audit law caught a lot of attention of people. So there's a lot of little things going on, which makes it difficult because each one's a little different. Each one focuses on some different aspects, but I think there's some key elements that we can talk about. And oftentimes it's really around, is there a human at the wheel? That seems to be very, very important. For example, there's a litigation underway right now in California of Mobley versus Workday, and that's really a central issue: is was a human involved at any point in these decisions? Do people know what's happening and how it's happening from a candidate's perspective, but also internally? Do your talent acquisition professionals in HR really understand what the models are doing? And if you really can't explain it in terms of how it's working, what it's doing, that would certainly be a risk factor. And so I think what we're seeing in the poll here really reflects the state of affairs of it's moving fast, nobody's really sure. And so we don't have this type of holistic, integrative governance solutions, that we would expect to see.
So when you think about that, just overall, when there's I'll call it a vacuum, and maybe that's not a complete vacuum of regulation, right? What should organizations do first to think about, designing, this guardrails or framework around, putting some things in place? You mentioned having a human involved. Are there more formal things that an organization can do or HR organization can do, not to stamp down the adoption of AI, but to provide guardrails? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I would say we would kind of want to start from a couple different perspectives. One is the business need. Like, what are we trying to achieve by putting AI in place? Are we just chasing a fad, or do we have a real business issue that we're trying to solve? I would think about what's the impact on your candidates. And while AI certainly can improve the efficiency from an organization's perspective, lower costs, um, many candidates don't like it. And it can lead to a negative experience for some candidates. And I think there's some places where it's really appropriate to use it from a candidate perspective, and other spots we might want to be mindful of it. And I'd say the third is compliance. And there's a lot of aspects to compliance, from ensuring that we comply with data privacy laws, that we are taking an IT perspective and protecting our data that we're collecting from applicants, but also from, I would say, fair employment practices like Title VII and other, civil rights laws related to how we hire employees and how we make decisions about those. So when we start from those kind of three perspectives, I think transparency is your number one, that people know what you're doing. Many people would advocate, particularly for those who might be covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, of having some opt-out if AI is not fully compliant with accessibility requirements that you may have. But I think really understanding what it does and how it does it, and is it achieving your ends, is it's more efficient. But if it's not delivering you the candidates you need, or enough of the candidates you need, or the wrong candidates, and certainly we're seeing, as organizations are using AI to screen candidates, which makes it harder and harder for them to break through the process or to be able to influence the process. Candidates are finding ways around it, such as, embedding the prompts in metadata and other places in resumes that seeks to give the AI tool instructions to put that resume up on the top of the pile. So I think there's a lot of things, and it's going to be reactionary for a while because we don't know what we don't know, and we're seeing candidates come up with some pretty clever things to counteract it. So lots of things to think about, but I think, making sure that we communicate clearly, that human beings are involved with the process and we are transparent, and we're using it at places where it makes sense. Doesn't make sense to use AI screening for senior level positions where the candidates expect high touch. However, let's say we're for a technology firm where we make AI software and we get 10,000 resumes a month. It makes a lot of sense there. We use the technology, we build the technology, we have the volumes for it. So some of it is being sensible about where you go into it, knowing that you can't know everything, trying to figure out what you can in advance, but just being thoughtful and reactive in kind of positive ways. You know,
I'm,
Darren,
I'm
what do
kind
you?
of,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of encouraged by the three things you listed kind of there at the beginning of that answer there, where there are things we're already doing today, right? You're already thinking about, your protected classes. You're already thinking about data privacy. You're already thinking about, those things. And so you don't have to go make up new rules and new policies just because we're using AI, right? You can apply some of those things you have in place today, maybe in a little bit different lens, but you've already got these best practices, as I'll call them. Policies is another way to say it, right? But these best practices
Yeah.
in place to protect data and to protect and provide transparency and those kind of things. Just applying those over um, is encouraging to hear you say that. That I don't have to go make up a bunch of new stuff.
Yeah, and certainly things might look different, right? So we may have to be creative in the way these things work and we apply them. And I'd really love to hear more from you, particularly in your thoughts around, what are you seeing given that idea that there's something borrowed, something new here, something old? How would you recommend that we really approach designing governance? Because it is critical with any technology, particularly one at this scale and with this level of impact on people. How would you design these governance frameworks that really align with, I think, your business, maybe where you're at from a technology and AI perspective? Like, what's working from your perspective, and what do you recommend?
Like it goes back a lot to what you were just talking about is the business need has to come first, right? What is the business need you're looking at, and what is the impact, and how can you begin to track that? And you think that AI is really it's rapidly transforming the recruiting space that I'm in, but its true value really lies in being strategic and a strategic application of the technology more than just the tactical side. And it's easy sometimes to get wrapped up in the tactical deployment of it. That's just another tool, right? And it can be a powerful tool, but it also can be a powerful differentiator, in the marketplace. And I think the way that we're beginning to use it within our organization from a strategic standpoint, it really has become a differentiator in the marketplace as opposed to just another tool, right? We got a software stack that we use, and there's a lot of different things, and we customize that software stack many times to complement what our clients have, right? They may have a great applicant tracking system, but they need a better CRM approach, or they need better, tracking devices and pipelining and things like that. So we'll use that from a strategic approach, so it's not just the tactical deployment of it. But when you think about how do you use the data that comes from that, right? So if you think about it strategically and you're using strategy wins, and I think that you have to think about what is your strategy going to be around AI and how's it going to impact your business, and then how you leverage that overall to gain strategic insights, to accelerate decision making, give power to the hiring managers and give power to the recruiters so they can make better decisions. And notice I didn't say AI making the decisions, right? It goes back to the business, the hiring managers, the leaders, the recruiters that are making those decisions, and then using that to really enhance your operational efficiency. And then you've got to think about all the data. And when you create a framework, you've got to create a framework around how you're going to analyze vast amounts of data to uncover patterns, both good and bad, right, that are in the organization that are coming out of the AI. And then how do you begin to use that in a way that creates a smarter recruiting process that's not just faster, but also more human centric? So data, drives the business need, drives the approach, with the recruiters, that drives the data that you're going to use, that drives the process you're going to have, that drives the ultimate outcomes of being better, smarter, faster. And I think in long term, that's going to differentiate individuals in the market that can have a better candidate experience. Again, balancing that, like you said, whether it's high volume or high touch, finding that right balance overall, being much more proactive in hiring decisions. I can't, we've dreamed about for years having a model in place that tells me, 2 years out, not just who's going to retire, but who's going to actually take that person's spot, right? And what we've got to do to get them there, and be much more proactive about individuals that are going to be there overall, and really just helping us make better decisions along the way. And I think that having that kind of framework in place that business need drives the process is going to really be critical, and that'll drive the strategy overall.
There's two things you said, and I have a follow-up question for you that I think are really critical in thinking about these issues. And you use the word proactive, and I think that is really key to effective governance. And it's proactive in two ways. One is certainly, as you're suggesting, auditing your data. That if you're going to be engaging with these really advanced technologies, auditing to know what the patterns actually are so that and you have an opportunity to adjust and course correct if things are not where they need to be or where you want them to be, to move things in the right direction in the future. So certainly governance needs to have that kind of forward-looking planning for when are we going to check in with our tools and systems to make sure that we really understand what's happening. Are they delivering value to the organization, or are they creating just a compliance risk? Um, and the other aspect of this really connects into workforce planning, and that's what is exciting about this is that much of workforce planning and talent acquisition, although they are clearly adjacent to each other, oftentimes are siloed. So I think your point about being strategic of your talent in the organization to make sure you're looking down the road to know what you're going to need and how you're going to need it, and then also connect that like to your talent architecture and other things you might be doing in the organization to understand your capabilities, your talent flows. But governance is, at the end of the day, is a piece of paper. And we really need people to enact it and people who understand it and people who want to live by it. Like, what have you seen in terms of the people side of it, of really getting your recruiters, especially since that's where the biggest use right now in HR is, really getting them up to speed on kind of what we need to do right now and how we might need to do things differently?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question, and I've thought about it a couple of different ways, and kind of stumbled into this one, this model. So I'll just be transparent, with that. But what we found is that the recruiters that are early adopters of AI are sometimes the ones that have the biggest fear when you use the term audit and governance.
Hmm.
But what we've asked them to do is become champions of process improvement, champions of enterprise adoption, and have them think differently about the AI that they're using today and what guardrails and or policies and or um, consequences are part of the AI that's coming into the ecosystem now, right? So having those champions that are early adopters and excited about using it also begin to craft and create, some of the same guardrails and understand because they're going to see the consequences first, right? And the beauty of that on our side is that we're small enough that you don't have a big governance panel and a big organization that comes in to review everything on a daily basis. So this happens in teams, in tiger teams that come in and review it periodically. I'd say probably every month or every other month on what are the things we need to do. And then a separate group does come in and do an audit, right? So the champions are the ones that are really helping bring to life what the impact is overall. When you think about, some of those policies and you just think about, quite honestly, like at the application stage, right? Having some guidance and a policy around how we use AI, right? So we're going to use AI if a candidate wants to use AI to format their CV, you know what? That's okay with us. We really don't care. Don't be embedding a bunch of stuff in there that, it's not true, right? And secretly in non-colored font, right? But don't create fictional achievements. Don't create roles or skills that doesn't reflect your real background, but then be an authentic, resume and authentic CV that is highlighting your relevant experience for this role that you're interested in, right? And begin to create some of those things that are a transparent way to use both from the recruiter side, but also the candidate side, and just giving them clear expectations will help us long term create a great candidate experience and a trusting hiring manager experience, so they both can feel like I know what the game is here, right? I know what information I'm sending over. I know that I've done this with my resume, so it perfectly matches the job, but it matches perfectly because I match perfectly, right? It's not something that's fictional.
Yeah. That's such an interesting point in that, we get so focused in thinking about government of shutting down all loopholes and risks as opposed to really thinking about some of the opportunities that, particularly for talent, AI has the potential to help us find these untapped sources of talent that we'd have never thought to look for, which has all sorts of benefits to the organization, um, as opposed to, as a professor, we're really worried about people cheating on AI. And so, the knee-jerk reaction is to return to give them a piece of paper, sit them in the classroom and have them write it with a pen. So, go back to the Stone Ages in some way, as opposed to thinking about how do we leverage the technology differently than what we've done before to find things that were not available to us. So, certainly there's again that reactivity point that you've talked about. Also, the forward looking should be a very strong part of any governance.
Yeah, and I think this, the two you can take what we just talked about, and I think SAP has a great, if you haven't seen it yet, SAP has a great framework for their candidates' expectations around, the use of AI, where they actually articulate almost every step in the process, what you can do and what you shouldn't do.
Mm.
And to me, as simple as that is, it does set the right expectations. Like, oh, if I do an interview and I want to practice interview questions, right? It's okay to simulate common interview scenarios and behavioral questions with the help of AI to help you improve how you communicate your experience, right? That's actually all good, right? Because people are not professional interviewers. They don't know how to answer questions all the time. So that practice is a good thing. But what's not okay is using live prompts on the screen, or they get to answer they have a live prompt there that's or pre-written script or video or something that's been recorded um, that does not actually reflect their experience, right? So helping them understand in advance, like you can use this, but don't do that because we're looking for an authentic, transparent exchange of information here so we can make a good decision and honestly, so you can make a good decision as well about this role and why it's important in the organization, why it's a good match for you.
Yeah, such a great point. I think
Well, I'm looking at my clock. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, certainly it's a really interesting point about just knowing the rules of the road, and that right now the signpostage isn't particularly clear. And the more we can do that, everyone clarifies their expectations for what are candidates looking for and what are organizations looking for, it certainly might help us balance the tension between the two a little bit better.
Agreed. Agreed. Totally. I was gonna say, I'm looking at the time, and I can't believe 30 minutes is already almost up because it just goes so fast. And maybe I just nerd out on these kind of things, but I did want to just pause just a second and see if we had any questions, Melissa, that we needed to hit real quick before our time's up.
It does not look like it, but I know I had pulled together another poll question if you want to run that and see what the audience is thinking.
Let's do it real quick.
Yeah. All right. Okay. On your screen, you should have a question that says, which of these risk mitigation strategies do you currently use? And while that is still running, Darren and Charles, we do have a question. Can you speak on using projects or skills assessments in the interview process to sidestep AI?
Interesting. Certainly people have used these types of approaches for a long time to try to have people do things in the moment. Um, if I'm understanding this, would be instead of doing a traditional interview question, you might give them a puzzle, a project, something to do to demonstrate a skill as opposed to just telling me about it. Certainly, that's a really powerful technique. What is interesting is a lot of the new AI prompting tools that are coming out to help with interviews can also work on these things. So, almost one set of skills would be, if we're going to give them a problem to solve, like the famous Google type interview questions where you have to demonstrate a skill, AI can help them with that. So for us, I think it's really time on some of these types of assessments just to think of a better mousetrap than instead of trying to, take away an individual's capacity to, use AI, could we leverage AI and have them demonstrate their skill since that's where a lot of work's going?
Great. And she did, or it's Jordan, right, currently using Test Gorilla, it
Mm.
records the person as they take the assessment, kind of like a proctor.
Yeah, and some of the new tools, like they'll have earpieces or they'll be embedded into the computer that tries to circumvent like these lockdown browsers that you would often use with online proctored assessment. So, certainly us trying to catch them is something we've done for a long time. may or may not be as useful as AI gets more sophisticated to circumvent those things. So, thinking of new ways of measuring these skills, because we do need to measure them to make sure we get the right people.
Right. Try to have the results of that final poll there on the screen.
I think that is a very good, from what I've seen overall, it's a very good distribution of some of the things that we've seen. Not as many FAQs. Again, that's maybe too junior for this crowd that they've moved past the FAQs and have documented policies and candidate opt-out options. And then, of course, using the bias audits or any kind of audits will help out. Interesting that no one's using transparency dashboards. I think the dashboards are still, probably a ways off as we're still trying to figure out what data we're trying to collect, overall. But Dr. Charles, I'll say thank you for joining. I know you're a busy guy, and we love having your brain power on these conversations. And look forward to next year when we have more in-depth conversations. So it'll all change by the time February, March rolls around. We'll have new topics to discuss and new challenges to address. So thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks so much for
Thank you
having me.
both. Yes, thanks, Dr. Charles. Thanks, Darren. I know it is. You both have busy days, but AI governance, AI in general seems to continue to be an exciting topic. So thank you both. Thanks to our audience as well for joining us. And a reminder, we will be sending out the recording via email, and it'll also be on the Engage to Excel website. Hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.